morning. My name is Rachel Carruthers, and I am the events manager here at the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce. Thank you again for joining us this morning for the first installment of our second season of I.D.E.A.S, our Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Advancement series. I.D.E.A.S is a virtual DEI training series hosted by the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce in partnership with Visit Portland. This second season, presented by Springborn Staffing, will cover various areas of DEI training in an effort to help business owners and employees create welcoming workplaces. The Chamber continues to collaborate with the Portland region's business community to facilitate programs, initiatives, and provide resources to make our region welcoming to all. Our I.D.E.A.S series is a great result of this work. Season 1 was focused on providing vital racial equity training that covered inclusive language and workplace policies, to diversity recruiting, and the process of appropriately completing an equity assessment of an organization or company. Following a very successful inaugural season in spring of 2024, the Chamber and its partners reached out to the business community for input and found that there was much more work to be done. This season, we've expanded our training to include other areas of essential DEI training, such as LGBTQ+ awareness, ageism in the workplace, neurodiversity, and more. We've also been able to expand our reach, partnering with Visit Portland and Springborn Staffing, both of which have expressed their shared passion for providing free and accessible resources to all those looking to expand their DEI training, thus fostering a healthier workforce and workplace culture that is welcoming to all throughout the region. Today's topic, LGBTQ+ awareness, creating a more inclusive work culture, is presented by Gia Drew, Executive Director of EqualityMaine. My apologies, everyone. Here at the Chamber, we had a little bit of technical issues this morning, but thank you for joining us this morning. Today's topic is LGBTQ+ awareness, creating a more inclusive work culture. It's being presented by Gia Drew, Executive Director of EqualityMaine. As a recognized state and national leader on LGBTQ rights and advocacy, Gia will lead an interactive and informative discussion about creating welcoming workplaces and business for LGBTQ+ people. Like all the Chamber's virtual signature events, today's presentation is free and will be recorded and made available for free replay on the Chamber's website and YouTube page. Check us out at portlandregion.com. I want to remind everyone that we're using a platform named StreamYard this morning, which streams through YouTube. I'd like to point out that in utilizing this platform, when you have questions for Gia, you can type them in the YouTube chat. Gia will answer questions at appropriate times throughout her presentation, and will also reserve time at the end of her presentation for a Q&A session with everyone here this morning. So please do engage in the chat throughout today's presentation. Now, in respects for time, I'd like to pass things over to Ken DeSimone, President of Springborn Staffing, our I.D.E.A.S season-long sponsor.
Thanks, Rachel. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ken DeSimone, President of Springborn Staffing here in Portland. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's an absolute honor to sponsor this important webinar series on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. At Springborn Staffing, we believe that fostering diverse and inclusive work environments isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. We see firsthand how diverse teams drive innovation, improve performance, and create more meaningful connections with customers and communities. The I.D.E.A.S series will provide valuable insights into how we can collectively create workplaces that are welcoming, fair, and empowering for everyone. We look forward to the discussions that will help us all grow and lead in this very crucial area. We're very excited to hear from today's speaker, Gia Drew of EqualityMaine, on strategies on creating welcoming workplaces for LGBTQ+ people. All of us at Springborn Staffing, thank you for being here, and let's make the most of today's opportunity to learn, share, and act for a better, more inclusive future. Now, pass it back over to Rachel. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks so much, Ken. And thank you everyone for bearing with us this morning during our technical difficulties. I think I've done enough talking and taken up plenty of time this morning. So I'm going to pass things over to our presenter this morning, Gia Drew. I will hand things over to her. Gia, take us away.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you to the Portland Regional Chamber. And thank you to Springboard for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And thanks for your patience as we're dealing with some technical problems here. That always happens. So it's great so many of you signed up to be part of this conversation, making your agency more LGBTQ plus inclusive. Again, my name is Gia Drew. I'm the Executive Director at EqualityMaine, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. We have a lot of things to go through in the next hour or so. It's a pretty ambitious agenda. Definitely a little bit about who I am and what brings me to this work, a little bit about EqualityMaine, a little bit of what we're going to talk about in here, some overarching questions about the LGBTQ plus community, a little sort of snapshot of what it feels like to be LGBTQ today. We'll talk about workplace culture. There's a wonderful video talking about workplace culture. And then we'll look at best practices moving forward and answer any of your questions for sure as we move through this presentation. If you want to please use the chat as you have questions throughout the presentation. There will be time at the end as well, including resources. So real quick about me. I'm the Director of EqualityMaine. We'll talk more about what we do specifically, and I identify as a white, queer, transgender woman. As you can see on the screen, I do a bunch of things in addition to my work here at EqualityMaine. Much of my work is connected to healthcare and young people. I was a high school teacher and coach for 20 years before joining EqualityMaine 12 years ago. And during that time, I actually transitioned on the job, becoming the first transgender public school teacher here in the state and the first out transgender high school coach in the country. And while that's exciting, and I am a competitive person, I like being first, it was actually really scary for me to actually come out as a public school teacher and coach here in Maine about 15 years ago. I will say, has a presentation, I'm just reading some comments. Yeah, the presentation started again, folks. I will say it was wonderful to come out and be myself in the workplace, because for 20 years I was hiding an important part of myself from my colleagues, from my students and athletes, and from my community. And when I came out, I felt like I was authentic, and I think my students noticed that as well. It was kind of funny when I came out and told my students what was going on. I said, by the way, you may have noticed I'm dressing a little different. And I said, well, can you call me Ms. Drew instead of Mr. Drew? Can you use she, her pronouns? And they were like, yeah, sure. Is that on the test? And I'm like, no, but it could be extra credit. And I think for me, that was really, really hopeful for me to recognize that this was not going to be a big deal for my students, at least, whether they had Ms. Drew or Mr. Drew as their teacher. And that was really exciting. Unfortunately, about a year into this, I heard that folks weren't happy that there was a transgender teacher teaching high school or coaching their students. And the situation got more tense, and I felt a lot more uncomfortable as a teacher. There was a group that was trying to get me removed as a teacher. And then about a couple months later, there was a budget cut, and I lost my position as a teacher and a coach, which was really upsetting for me. But I'm optimistic, so I applied for other jobs and hoping I'd get another job right away. What I soon learned was people weren't ready to hire an out transgender person here in Maine as a teacher and a coach. Despite having really strong laws and policies against discrimination, I have learned that, if you don't like somebody, they can do all sorts of things that make it uncomfortable for that person to work there. And I kind of felt that, which is really unfortunate. And so I left my teaching career and coaching career and started volunteering here at EqualityMaine And so over the last 12 years, I went from a volunteer to a coordinator to the program director, and now I'm the executive director here at EqualityMaine. And I get to talk about these issues on presentations like this, but all sorts of presentations across the state and country. And I do a lot of work with state government as well. And I can look back now and go, you know what? I'm glad I lost my job, because it really did open my eyes to the work we need to do to make sure that everyone can be authentic in themselves, can have a family, can go to work here in the state of Maine. And I think that's part of this discussion today is, even though there are laws and policies here in the state of Maine that protect against discrimination, I think we all play a role in changing the climate, in changing hearts and minds around different areas or issues that make some people uncomfortable. And that includes, what does it mean to be LGBTQ? So that's what brings me to this work and why I'm presenting today. So let's move on. A little bit about EqualityMaine. Hopefully you've heard of EqualityMaine, especially if you've been in Maine for a long time. We were founded just over 40 years ago in the aftermath of a really horrible tragedy. A young man was killed in Bangor, Maine for being gay. And a group of community members formed a group then known as the Maine Lesbian Gay Political Alliance to make sure that LGBTQ people could walk down the street safely, could go to school, have a job, that LGBTQ people were connected to one another, that they didn't feel alone, that laws and policies affirmed our dignity as people, and provide education on how great it is to be LGBTQ. And that's what we still do 40 years later. We've definitely expanded our role across the state in those 40 years. And so we're actually 3 different organizations. We're EqualityMaine, which is our political advocacy group that does a lot of the work on public policy and law. We're EqualityMaine Foundation that does all the education programs to inspire young people and older folks. And we're also EqualityMaine PAC. And so we are a political organization that does endorse candidates, but they are 3 completely separate organizations. And as the executive director, I oversee all of that and support our staff, tremendous number of employees and community members that live in every corner of the state and in every county. And so that's a little bit about EqualityMaine. Please go to equalitymaine.org if you want to learn more about who we are and what we do. A little bit about this presentation and why I do it, but also disclaimers. This is my job. I love talking about these issues. I'm not uncomfortable talking about these issues. I choose to do this. And this is really important when we're talking about issues related to the workplace and someone's identity. I know it's really easy to lean on someone on your staff who may be part of a community, whether that's LGBTQ or an immigrant or someone who's Black and or brown. Hey, can you tell me more about what it's like to be disabled? Or can you tell me more what it's like to be LGBTQ and how we could do a better job here in the workplace? That's not always the best strategy. Sometimes you didn't hire that person to teach you. You probably hired that person to do a specific skill. So always be careful about leaning on marginalized communities to teach you what you need to do in the workplace. There are people like us all across the state and the country that do this work, that you can ask for these specific things. Today, I'm going to share some of my story a little bit. Hopefully you have some questions here, so hopefully you'll take some learning away with you. Nobody knows everything. I've been doing this work for about 12 years, and I'm still learning every day about what it means to be LGBTQ. And hopefully you'll have some questions for us today. So before I jump into the actual slideshow, I wonder if you came with some questions for this conversation. I'd really love to see some comments over here about, are there some things that you're experiencing in the workplace that you don't have an answer for? Or maybe you're like, I saw this the other day and I wonder how I could respond in a way that is helpful. Or maybe you heard a comment that wasn't so nice, but you didn't know how to interrupt that. So if you have questions about this specific topic and the workplace, LGBTQ in the workplace, I would love to see some comments over there. So go ahead and type them in there to know that you're paying attention and listening. That would make me feel really great this morning. And I'm going to sip my water while I wait for a comment. As comments are coming in, I do want to remind people a little bit about the LGBTQ plus community. And if you're part of the community, you probably have some insight, I hope, about what it means to be LGBTQ. And if you're not part of the community, maybe you have a close personal friend or loved one who is. And so you get to know a little bit more about what it means to be LGBTQ. And there are some folks who are not connected to the community for whatever reason. But I do think it's important to recognize that LGBTQ people are everywhere and represent a diverse set of subgroups. It's important to recognize that LGBTQ people come from every race, religion, ethnicity, nationality, class, or other dimension of identity or experience. And additionally, some people you may think are LGBTQ may not use the letters LGBTQ. They may not want to talk about being part of the LGBT community, and that's absolutely okay. I think it's really important to recognize that when we use labels like LGBTQ, that feels good to a lot of people. It feels good to me when I talk about being part of the community, but some people don't feel like they have the safety to talk about LGBTQ. Some people just don't like those letters or those words to describe who they are, and so they may not like to talk about their connection to the LGBTQ community, and that's absolutely okay. I'm starting to see some questions in the chat, which is really helpful, so please put them in there so we can address them as we go through the presentation. One thing I do want to pull back a little bit and sort of get a scan of the entire globe on what it feels like to be LGBTQ or what laws and policies look like across the globe. And you can see this sort of stretched out map of the globe to see where there are some places where it's really dangerous to be LGBTQ, where the government or their laws and policies can be really scary if you're part of the LGBTQ community or accused of being part of the LGBTQ community. And so it's important to recognize as we live in a global economy and there are folks moving from one place to another, and some people are working hybrid and they may be stationed in different parts of the country or different parts of the globe. It's really important as an employer to know potentially what that person could be experiencing right now on the ground, or if they came from a different region and now live here in Maine or the United States, what they could be feeling or have experienced in their lives. And it's always important to sort of step back and go, you know what? Maine is very specific. But so many people who live in Maine came from somewhere else. And I think it's important to recognize maybe what their experience was related to being LGBTQ. And you can see on this map, there's still a significant amount of red, orange, and yellow areas, which tend to be a lot more hostile to LGBTQ people compared to the bluer or purple areas in terms of where it may be a little safer for you. And of course, this map is ever changing. As you all know, just recently, some political changes happened in different countries, including here in the United States, and things are changing as we speak about LGBTQ rights here in this country or in other countries. And so just be aware that this is an ever-changing landscape. I saw a comment about what the letters stand for. We actually are going to get into what the letters stand for and why we use those letters in just a second. So thank you for that question. If we zoom in a little bit to the United States, there is a great organization called the Movement Advancement Project that we partner with on a lot of things. They keep track of the different rights and policies in each state and across the country. They have some wonderful messaging guidelines on specific topics like the workplace, like family and family protections. But I know when we looked at the last map, United States looked all blue. But when we pull back and actually look at the country, you can see that there is a patchwork of different colors here. And the dark green colors here on this map are the states that have fuller or full protections for LGBTQ people in all aspects of their life, from education, to employment, to public accommodations, to housing, to getting credit. And you can see there's a clump of states in the Northeast and a group over on the West Coast and a few in the middle there that are green. And again, in the middle, and there's some other places you see the orange and the red. And those are states where there are little or no protections for being LGBTQ. In fact, there may be actually laws that punish people for being LGBTQ. And again, this is a very dynamic map that is constantly changing every month here in the United States, where different states are changing different laws and policies related to being LGBTQ. So again, it's really important to be mindful of where your workforce is, whether they're working all across the United States. If you have to travel for work, or if you're going to a conference, being aware of the situation of traveling to these other states and being sensitive to folks who are LGBTQ who may not feel so comfortable, for example, going to a conference in one of these red states where the laws and policies of those states may be hostile against LGBTQ people. And so I think this is really important, again, to just have some awareness around the lack of unified agreement on rights and policies for LGBTQ people. And so this is a really important map to pay attention to, and there's great resources at the Movement Advancement Project to learn more about your rights. I do want to talk a little bit about how many LGBTQ people are there out in the world. And it's hard to tell sometimes. It's really hard to tell because we don't all walk down the street with a big sign that says, I'm gay or I'm trans. Most people just live their lives quietly, have a job, maybe have a family, go on vacation, just like anybody else. So you may not know that the people around you are LGBTQ. And so we don't always know who's LGBTQ or how many people are LGBTQ. And so there is some surveying that goes along with different agencies. I know there's one that from Williams Institute at UCLA does a really wonderful survey. Gallup just did a recent survey around the United States with adults, and they found that about 7% of adults in Maine say they're LGBTQ+, which is on par with other states. We tend to have a slightly higher percentage of adults who say they're LGBTQ in Maine. There's a reason for that. I think there's been a lot of work around safety for LGBTQ people in Maine, so maybe those folks feel like they can say they're LGBTQ. And importantly, what about young people? The future of the workforce, future customers. We do know, because the state of Maine does a health survey every 2 years of teenagers. And what we know now is about 25% of all teenagers here in the state of Maine, that's 1 in 4. 1 in 4 teenagers in the state of Maine say that they're LGBTQ+. And that number has been growing steadily as I've been watching this data for the last about 8 or 9 years. And I remember when they first did this survey and they asked that demographic question, that number was around 10 or 15%. But that number keeps going up. And I think there are many reasons for this. One is we've created a more inclusive culture here in the state of Maine. We've had some more positive role models on what it means to be LGBTQ. And young people have access to resources in their local communities or online, so they can feel more comfortable saying they're LGBTQ. And so many of these young people are not out, but recognizing that that is such a high percentage of the future workforce and your future customer base, I think it's really important to put a note on that maybe that person that you're working with or working alongside with or trying to hire may or may not be LGBTQ, but I bet there's someone in their life who is. It could be a family member or close personal friend. So most of us are connected to someone who's LGBTQ. We just may not be aware of it. So before we get into some of the language, talk more about the letters LGBTQ, I do want to play this little video about some feedback about what it means to be LGBTQ in the workplace. Monday.com put together this little video that I think is really helpful, especially from different points of view of what it's like to be in the workforce and to know that someone you're working alongside is LGBTQ, and about some of the comments that people hear. So we're going to cue up this video, and I'm going to step aside so y'all can watch it.
Are these real, by the way? Did somebody actually submitted this? Oh my God.
I submitted, and I think probably mine was one of those long ones that you have to cut down.
Okay, we're good. Okay, so let's roll. We're gonna read some things.
Okay.
We'll connect and we'll talk about it.
Right now?
Yeah.
Two of my straight teammates regularly call each other gay as a joke.
One time I asked them why they do that, and they said it's just guy talk and not meant to be offensive.
I don't understand. So if guy talk is a joke, why am I the joke? You're not a joke. I feel like people using the word guy talk as a way to excuse their poor behavior.
This actually makes me angry. So if I'm thinking about slurs in general from my side, I don't personally like to compare, but for the individual, the impact is the same. In my personal opinion, no place for them, especially in a professional work environment.
Yeah, no, I what they're saying. And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a Libra, but I always just try to see, you know, both sides there. Like, not everybody is going to say something's gay to be malicious. Hi, I'm Manuel Vargas. I'm part of the Pride ERG, which is a collective that really helps and supports the queer folk that work here at Monday. And my pronouns are they, them, and theirs.
As a teenager, I was scared of coming out. I remember being called a freak or that my existence was a disgrace to my parents. My mental health started to get worse, and I almost ended my life when I felt lost. Gladly, I found allies and my team of colleagues in my workplace, and here I feel so happy and proud to be showing who I really am.
I want to hug this person.
Wow. I can relate to this a lot more than you realize, and it's hard. But I'm really happy that you found your community and that you found people who make you feel safe and seen, because we all deserve that. And I'm proud of you. But yeah, I've been in these shoes. I know what it's like to go to sleep and pray that you don't wake up the next morning. So, but thankfully I'm not there anymore. Things get better.
I identify as a bisexual woman, and I've been in relationships with both women and men in the past. Right now, I'm in a loving straight relationship, and I'd like to come out as bisexual to my team. Coming out at work to me means showing who I really am. Unique thing about being bisexual, and especially at work, it can sometimes feel irrelevant. And over time, I came to understand, like, it's not really true. It is important for the people in your world to know about you and who you are. It's kind of scary to do this now, here on camera, coming out at work. But if you're gonna do it, do it.
I'm also bisexual, but I'm married to a woman, and I think I have to live up to that expectation that I'm a lesbian. And sometimes I refrain from making a comment or like talking about my ex-boyfriends, because it was so hard to get here to where I can finally say, hey, I can, you know, I love women, that it feels like I'd be taking a step back. Hi, I'm Christina Farah, and I'm queer, very queer.
Hi, my name is Dana, and I am a queer woman. I am a cisgender woman and like dressing more masculine, but because of that, I get routinely misgendered. It makes me feel as if I'm not really allowed to dress unless it fits the bill of how a woman should dress. I have countless situations where I'm misgendered and I get called all these like masculine terms all the time. And then I have an internal struggle of like, okay, wait, do I go with this? A lot of the times I find myself like, I'll lower my voice so that I sound like a boy and meet their expectations. Or alternatively, they'll figure it out and then they'll look me up and down and it's like, oh, wait, no, and then that moment is probably the reason like I avoid the conversation, because it's just so awkward.
As a sales rep, you're encouraged to bring your full self to work. However, the culture can be very intense. I often caught myself lowering my voice on purpose to sound more masculine, because if I speak in a normal tone, I feel like a target. I definitely can relate to this, not here at Monday, but in my previous sales role. I've never lowered my voice. I can't. I could, but it won't last long. I did feel like oftentimes I had to pretty much like blend in with the crowd.
Ooh, I've seen this happening. As a manager who needs to deal with this type of situation in a group environment, I definitely had like a very hard policy. I'll just act.
You think that has to do with your South American roots?
Maybe. Honestly, I don't know. I'll just know how I'll react. My name is Alex Doña. I work for Monday.com, leading the sales and business development team for the rest of the world. I'm, and it's weird to say supporter. I'll say that I just live side by side equally.
You can say ally.
I like that word. I like that word, ally.
There's absolutely a responsibility in an allyship. It's practice, it's active. It's a conscious choice. It's a loud choice.
When I decided to come out to my parents, it went terribly and I felt really depressed. At that time, I had heard my colleagues speak about LGBTQ+ issues in a slightly negative tone.
And I realized how I don't always feel safe sharing about mental health issues at work.
This really meets me personally in terms of coming out to parents and family, because it was only a few years ago that my brother came out to me. I just, in some ways, I wish my brother had come out to me earlier, because then I could have been an ally for him earlier.
This needs to be top priority. Regardless of how you define yourself, how you identify yourself, regular people go through the same kind of thing.
I also want to take this chance to highlight, when you say regular people, I think you need to be careful on what you mean. It's kind of talking about a group that you're excluded from. See what I mean?
Absolutely. Thanks for that. And by the way, if I may, how would you describe that? What will be the right terminology that you will feel it's more appropriate?
I wouldn't say regular people. I would say straight people or people who are not in the LGBTQ+ community.
Yeah, and also from my side, it's like these are some rules that came out of the box or as default for some, but not for everyone. So for me, it's like a great opportunity to incorporate that into my toolbox of rules.
Calling someone out for it is uncomfortable, but receiving the call out is more uncomfortable, and that's where growth happens.
Hi, my name is Idan, and I'm a straight male, I guess. I don't really say this anytime, and I don't feel really connected to it.
Why don't you feel the need to identify yourself?
Because I guess for me, it's a non-issue.
My partner and I are currently going through a surrogacy process, and when I talk about this at work, I often get asked very casually, who is the biological father? This question makes me feel very uncomfortable. We are both the fathers, and the decision to share who the biological father is a very intimate and personal question. Reading all of these is kind of making me feel a little bit like, maybe we should just go back to a time where we drew a really hard line between your personal life and your work life. Not because we shouldn't understand each other and know each other, and just because it's a lot. Like, you open one portion of your life and there are questions.
I wouldn't ask this question, but I think when you present yourself with this, you are like 100 levels ahead of the person that's in front of you. He doesn't know what it is to be you, and it's like he's in level 1 and you are in level 100, and it may come from the best intention.
I didn't think I was going to share, but my wife and I are going through reciprocal IVF, and I think people don't mean to offend you, even though it's weird. It's just so unfair, right? That we don't get the chance to make a baby that is half yours and half mine. It looks like both of us a little. I get it. But you're both the fathers, and we're both the moms.
It's so clear to me that everyone has a story.
This didn't upset me because these are things, like, nothing here surprised me.
There is so much that people carry with them, and we don't know how it is to be a person that feels that is not acceptable.
I'm sure there are even more that were not submitted.
fun. Should I leave the way I came in or the other way? The way I came in. Okay.
Great. It's a very moving short video from Monday.com about workplace and what is overheard or said. It definitely brings up some feelings for me around workplace culture and what we say and how we say things in the workplace, and how sometimes we make mistakes or we don't have the experience and we say things and it's with good intention, but again it may be received differently. And I wonder, after watching this video, if anything has come up for you in terms of what your immediate reaction was to this film, what surprised you. Is there a question that you have from the video that you want to sort of talk about? Are there any other observations about this? I love that video. It's so impactful. We'll definitely make sure that you get a hold of it. It's really interesting, especially the global point of view, that this wasn't just about here. This Monday.com's international company, and I think it's important to recognize that when we're talking about workplace culture, yes, we're talking about Maine, but we do live, like I said before, in a global economy where people are working from all points across the globe, whether here or hybrid online. We are connecting with folks with different lived experiences, and it's important to sort of have a broader point of view on what it means to be LGBTQ and making sure that we're sensitive so folks can be at work and be their true authentic selves. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the impact of having to hide who you are out of fear, or maybe because you've heard of something in the workplace. And so I see some really good comments about how that video is really helpful. We'll definitely make sure you get the link to that video, and I think Riley may put that in the chat so folks can access that video. It's really important. There are some questions in the chat, but I think they're going to be answered in the next slide. I think some of the questions that pop up here are like, wow, we should be talking about these things in the workplace. And there were some things about people having children. And that's such a common thing for most people to talk about, is their kids, their family, their grandparents. Someone is expecting, someone's getting engaged. And so why wouldn't we want to talk about LGBTQ people who have similar experiences? And so I think it's important to recognize that it's important for us to be able to talk about who we are as people in the workplace, and that includes our partners, or if we're having children, or our parents. But that could create some more uncomfortable conversations. And so I think being open to feedback, and there was one of the presenters in here on the video who made a comment about regular people, and then they got some feedback. Maybe that isn't the best word to use. Can you think of a different word? And I love that person was open to open to feedback. And I think some people get a little afraid of getting feedback about something they said because we live in this call out culture. But if we call in people and we say, hey, what you just said, maybe not the best fit or isn't the most welcoming or inclusive. Can we think about another word or phrase that is more welcoming and inclusive? And I think that is so important, is being open to feedback in the workplace. And I think that just makes everybody feel like they have a voice and to say what's going on in the workplace. All right, I'm going to keep this train moving. I know we started a little late and I still have a few more slides to go. And keep those comments coming in. I'll come back to make sure I hit them all before we wrap up today. A couple of startling statistics about the workplace. In addition to the sort of anecdotal stories we just heard, there's some statistics that I think are really important to just sort of lift up to say, oh, so probably the most striking statistic is almost half, 46% of LGBTQ people in the United States who are at work are not out at work. They don't tell their peers, their boss, that they're LGBTQ. And there are many reasons for this that you probably can think of. I can think of a few. I was not out at work for the first 20 years of my work experience. To most people, I think there might have been one or two people that I trusted in the workplace, but I wasn't out. And some of those reasons were I didn't feel like I was going to be treated fairly. I felt like I might not get that promotion, or I'd heard some negative comments from other people I'd worked with. And I'm like, oh, maybe they don't like LGBTQ people. And so I kept my identity for like secret for much of my 20 years as a teacher. And I felt really bad about that. And so I understand why people don't come out at work, because there's still a culture of we don't talk about being LGBTQ at work. And then the crossover, if you're an LGBTQ employee of color, which makes up about a third of all LGBTQ employees, you're probably more likely not to be hired because of your LGBTQ status than your white counterparts. And so there's also another layer to the intersectional oppression that occurs for folks of color who are also LGBTQ. And so that's also something to be aware of. LGBTQ people, like we said before, exist in every community, every subgroup, every race, every religion. There are LGBTQ people. And so not every LGBTQ person looks like me. I look like me, but that's it. You can't tell someone is LGBTQ by looking at them. Transgender employees are significantly more likely to experience discrimination because they are trans than their LGB employees. So trans people face a much higher rate of discrimination and bias in the workplace than lesbian, gay, and bisexual employees. This statistic, this next one, I think is really important. Nearly 2/3 of non-LGBTQ employees believe it's unprofessional to discuss sexual orientation and gender identity in the workplace. And I think this piece is so important for us to sort of understand and recognize, because there's still a current where people think it's inappropriate to talk about being LGBTQ. We have states that are passing laws that make it illegal to being LGBTQ. We have a president who just removed T from all the language in federal government issues. So there's some discomfort around talking about LGBTQ in the federal government now. And so I think I want to just sort of say, pause here for a second and go, why can't we talk about who we are at work? Everybody else gets to talk about who they are, or not everybody else, but a lot of people get to talk about who they are, about who they went on a hike this weekend. Did they go visit their parents? Maybe their parents are two women, or maybe their grandfather is gay, or maybe their child is trans and they want to try out for their softball team, but they're afraid. But now you don't know if you can talk about your transgender child in the workplace, so you don't. And I think there's a confusion about talking about what it means to be LGBTQ in the workplace, and people think it's about something else. And I think people think it's about this other part of our lives that everyone has, this more private part. But we're talking about the part we can share. It's about our families, our communities, and those things. And I think that's important, that everyone can talk about who they are at the workplace, because it just makes for a more inclusive and welcoming culture. And we get to know people a little bit more. And so we also know that LGBTQ people often cover or downplay aspects of their authentic selves. I think there was something in the video about someone like modifying their voice in the workplace not to come off as one way or another, or not to dress a certain way. I definitely have fought with that about my own voice. My voice is my voice. It's not very high, it's not very low. I tried to have like a higher voice at one time, but I couldn't do it. So I don't even like try anymore. But often when I'm on the phone, I get misgendered, especially when I'm talking to someone I don't know and they can't see me. Often I get, "Sorry, sir, your order isn't ready yet. It'll be in next week." And then I'm like, "Oh, they think I'm a guy." And so I'm like, "It's ma'am. When will the boots come in?" it's really snowy and messy out there. And so I get it. There are issues around being LGBTQ in the workplace or having to hide who we are in the workplace. And because of that, LGBTQ people feel tired that they have to sort of keep checking what they say or don't say, what they wear to work, how they talk, how they express themselves. So LGBTQ employees actually feel exhausted having to sort of navigate all these different worlds, whether it's a client who may or may not be supportive, whether it's a subcontractor, whether it's a customer, whether it's a coworker. Not knowing that they are safe to be themselves plays a toll on people, and that's really unfortunate. I'm going to go through a couple slides on some best practices in the workplace, just so folks have some big picture ideas. Again, if you need some more specific, detailed things about your specific workplace, you definitely can reach out to us at EqualityMaine or me directly here at EqualityMaine to answer those specific questions, and I will answer questions at the end. One of the key things is making sure things are in writing. I know people say, oh, we're very welcoming here at so-and-so business. But then I go and look and see, do you have a non-discrimination policy that clearly names sexual orientation and gender identity? Do you have anything in writing around what it means to be trans, and do trans people have any accommodations that they may need in the workplace? Do I see visible cues in the job site or online that talk about being LGBTQ and how much we celebrate it? And I will say that has changed dramatically over the last 20 years, when only 3% of Fortune 500 companies had any type of LGBTQ policy. And today, it's over 90% of businesses have some type of policy related to be LGBT or LGBTQ in the workplace. And so we've made great progress over the last 20, 30 years on LGBTQ rights and making sure those are in writing. But those are really important things to have for folks. I know members of our community are scanning to look for cues if they're looking for a job, to see if that place is going to be welcoming and affirming to them. And they'll look online, they'll read your policies, they'll look for cues that your business is LGBTQ inclusive. If they don't see those clues or those words, they may not apply. And so it's important for folks to put things in writing to make things visible. I know that right now, because of the current climate, that may feel uncomfortable for you. That may feel like, oh, I might get targeted or attacked for saying these specific things. But I'm encouraging the workforce and employers, as our host said today, it's so important that we celebrate and support diversity in the workplace, because that's what makes our jobs so much more effective. It makes our jobs so much more enjoyable to go to work when we can be ourselves. It makes the workplace a place that I want to be part of. And so I hope that folks recognize, while I know there's some fear out there about saying that you're LGBTQ inclusive, I think it's important that workplaces stand together and say, yeah, no, we actually believe in diversity. It's important for hiring a workforce, retaining a workforce, and making sure we have a strong and diverse customer base as well. So I know it can be scary to put these things in writing, but I think it's really important. If you're part of HR, making sure that all your benefits are inclusive, that they make sure that they respond to some of the specific needs that LGBTQ people may have. And there's a whole range of things that benefits can have that are more inclusive, and includes things related to making sure that you have preventative medical insurance benefits, time off benefits. Here in Maine, we just passed Maine Paid Family Leave, which is really important, which has a really broad definition of family. So those things are really important as well. One specific area I did want to spend a moment on, because just in the last 2 weeks, some things have changed related to identification documents. All of us need some type of documentation to open a bank account, start a job, enroll in a course, some type of identification, whether that's a social security card, a license or ID, or even a passport or a birth certificate. It's really important to be understanding, especially transgender and non-binary people, related to their identification right now. It can be complicated to go back and update your birth certificate in the state that you were born or your country where you were born. Maybe you've moved many times and maybe that state doesn't allow you to update your birth certificate and you can't change that. Maybe you live in a state where you can't change your gender marker on your state ID. Those are all sorts of issues that may create some confusion or complications in the hiring process, or when you're working with a customer and you have to see their identification and it doesn't quite exactly match who they are. I think being sensitive to that this is a complicated thing for people to get all their identity documents in alignment. Only about 1/5 of transgender people have all their documents in agreement. And that includes myself. I've never gone back and updated my birth certificate. I don't think I updated my social security card, my gender marker on it. So it's a real thing. And just recently, in the last 2 weeks, we've learned that folks cannot change their gender marker on social security cards or on passports because those are governed by the federal government. Here in the state of Maine, you can update your license or your ID. That's not going to change. You can do that. You can go and change your name in the state of Maine. There are a couple different ways you can do that. And you can update your birth record here in the state of Maine as well. But that's not universal around the country. And so this is really important to recognize, whether you're dealing with a potential new employee or you're working with a customer, that not everybody has access to update to make sure that all their identity documents are in agreement. So be sensitive and aware of this situation for people who are trans, non-binary. They may not have all the right little letters on their documents. And so be understanding, be compassionate as you sort of try to support them in this process. Happy to, again, answer questions related to this. I know this is a complicated area, and we are trying our best to make sure people understand what our best practices related to hiring or working with transgender people in the workplace. Diversity training, coming to these trainings is really great. I know the Chamber has a whole series of these trainings, so please keep attending these. But also make sure you're bringing trainings back to your staff. I think this is really important, especially for management, so they understand what is expected of them in the workplace. I know next week is the Inclusion Conference, which is another good way to learn more about diversity in the workplace. But there's all sorts of ways that you can bring diversity training to the workplace, so everyone feels welcome and included. Supportive language, and I think there were some questions in here about supportive language, and it can be a minefield. I recognize that the language keeps evolving, which is true, and I would say I'm sorry, but I don't make the rules. Language changes how people use it. You know, when I was growing up in the 70s, we used maybe lesbian, maybe gay, maybe bisexual, but I never saw T or Q in the letters, all the other letters growing up. So it's important to know that the letters evolve and change on how we use them and how people identify. And the order has changed too. I know there was a comment earlier about LGB, LGBTQ, LGBTQ+, LGBTQIA. And I'm like, well, all sorts of people use different letters. I like LGBTQ+, but sometimes a survey or some data is specific to a specific population. So maybe it's just LGB, who knows? Originally, G was first, and then things shifted during and after the HIV and AIDS sort of pandemic and plague here in the United States, where lesbian folks did such an amazing job stepping up and caring for a whole group of folks, gay men who are dying, that most folks said, we should put the L first, which is wonderful. So that's why we have L first, LGBTQ, but that's not the case all over the place. And so it's okay if you don't get it right. I also want to talk about, when we're talking about groups of people, how do we use language that is welcoming and inclusive and not exclusionary? And so there are different little things that y'all can do when you're talking to a group of people. Now, I can't see you, which is really sad today. But if I were, I'd say, hey, good morning. How y'all doing? It's great to see you. Thanks, folks, for being here. I would use phrases and words that are as welcoming and as inclusive as possible, rather than very narrowly focused terminology related to maybe gender. I try to avoid things like ladies and gentlemen, or if I'm working with young people, boys and girls, because I don't know who my audience is. And so if I can choose phrases that are even more welcoming, I'm going to choose phrases that are more welcoming, like friends, folks. Having lived in the South, I love y'all, because y'all means all. And then there are some other phrases that are a little more like, I wonder if that's inclusive or not. And you're going to know this one when I say it. Hey guys, can we go do that now? I don't love the use of guys when we're talking to a group of people who maybe have different genders, or maybe you don't know who they are. And I know it's kind of universal right now, but it's still a little icky, especially for people like me who are trans and maybe don't want to be called a guy. I know I've gone out to restaurants with some actual guys, and then the wait staff comes and go, hey, all right, guys, we'll be right with you with your order. And then I'm like, oh, wait, do they think I'm a guy? And so there's some sensitivity around the language we use to make sure we're inclusive as possible, and trying to I wonder if I could use these words rather than these words. And one of the things that you can do with each other in this process is support one another. I've been a coach and been a teacher for 20 years. I completely believe in positive reinforcement is so much more effective than criticizing somebody. So when you hear someone use an inclusive phrase, let them know, hey, I heard you use friends, y'all, folks, in the staff meeting this morning. That was great. I'm having a hard time doing that, but seeing you do it, maybe I will do it in my next meeting. So I do think there's a way that we can support one another to make our workplace more inclusive and welcoming, and it has to do with the words we choose to use. A lot of them are habits, so breaking some of those habits, I think, is important. And then having side conversations with people to call them in when they make a mistake. It's going to happen. But we don't want to shame anybody. We don't want to coerce anybody. So, hey, I heard you use this phrase. I don't think it's very welcoming or inclusive. Perhaps think of another word you can use. And I think you can do that in a sort of a quiet way, in a supportive way, moving forward. I'm looking at some of the questions in here. They're really great questions about how do I handle when you've known someone as female their life, and now you want to be called they, them, and you make a mistake. I think that is such a great question. If you make a mistake, own it, apologize quickly, and correct yourself, and then move on. Don't make a scene. Don't make it about you, because it'll make the situation worse. I'm sorry, you're right, they, them. I'll do a better job next time. And if you say that, make sure you do a better job next time. This actually happened to me when I was a teacher. Like I said, I was teaching for about 18, 19 years as Mr. Drew, he, him pronouns. And then I transitioned and went by Ms. Drew, she, her pronouns. And I was at this one school for about 8 or 9 years. So most folks were had this habit of calling me my previous name. And then I transitioned and I was there, and most folks were doing a really good job on Ms. Drew or she, her, except the principal. The principal kept messing up in staff meetings, in meetings with like students. She kept saying, Mr. Drew that, and Mr. or he this. And I'm like, ugh, and I was like, oh, could someone just tell her that she's making a mistake? And I don't know if anyone did. So I actually, after about a month of being misgendered time and time again, I had to go up to her and say, hey, listen, I appreciate the support, and but I don't know if you're doing this, but you're continuing to call me Mr. Drew, and you're continuing to use he, him pronouns, or it's popping up from time to time. And she was like, oh no, I didn't even know I was doing that. Thank you for letting me know. What can I do to make sure I don't do that in the future? I appreciate her honesty that she wasn't even aware of it because it had become such a pattern for her to call me those previous names. So I get it. When you know somebody, you're familiar with them, that you kind of just have these shortcuts to call them by their previous names or different names. And so we came up with a little strategy about, hey, when you're about to talk to me or you see me, take a deep breath, think about this conversation, and then use Ms. Drew or she, and we'll go from there. And she was great. I think she just needed to own that she had made a mistake, but she wasn't even aware she was making a mistake, and she needed a little strategy. And I think that's where colleagues and friends can do a really great job in the workplace. When you see something, see someone making a mistake and it isn't corrected, you can always go up to them later and go, hey, by the way, that's Danny. They use they, them pronouns. Oh yeah, thank you. I think that's so important that we are in this together, that we can support one another in this process. We don't want to shame people. We want to bring people along. Do you have a substitute for sir, ma'am? I get it. I taught in the South. I come from a military family. There was a lot of sirs and ma'ams in my life. Absolutely. If you know the person really likes sir and ma'am, pile it on. Give it to them. I love it if that's what they like. But if you're unsure about sir and ma'am, then I would say, hey folks, great to see y'all. I would avoid it if you're not too sure. Or if you want to give it a go, but then you get some looks, so like, oops, I made a mistake. Sorry, I'll use some different words. There are some other words and phrases and titles that are maybe a little bit different. If you have to use some of those Mr., Ms., Mrs., Doctor in some of your documentations, we just ran into this recently with comments to one of the Senate offices. They only accept certain like titles. And we're like, not everyone is comfortable with being Mr. or Ms. Is there a gender neutral one? And there is. There's one called MX or mix that is for someone who isn't Mr. or Ms. And definitely there are some folks from different languages who have different phrases as well. But I got to keep this train moving. It's already 10:12 and I have a few more slides. So I'm going to get through these and then I'll answer some of your questions. Know the law. The good thing is that you're in Maine, and the laws in Maine are crystal clear, and they haven't changed for 20 years related to LGBTQ rights in the workplace. LGBTQ people have protections in the workplace, and we've had since 2005, when voters actually went and said, yeah, absolutely, we believe in LGBTQ people should not be discriminated against in education and in employment and housing and credit and public accommodations. So we're one of 20 states that have these full protections on LGBTQ rights. But unfortunately, there are 30 states that don't have these full protections. I will say that in 2020, the Supreme Court did rule that sexual orientation and gender identity are protected under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act that bars employees from discriminating against LGBTQ. And that has not changed. The president can't change that. Supreme Court would have to change their decision from 4 or 5 years ago if that were to change. And that certainly doesn't change the laws here in the state of Maine. The laws in Maine are absolutely clear that you may not discriminate against someone who is LGBTQ or you perceive to be LGBTQ in the workplace. This is so important. So please know your law and your policies for your organization, and also understand what that may look like if you have employees in different states. So know your rights, but also know your employees' rights. Oh, be a visible ally. This was in the video too. How can you use that word ally as an action word? Ally means you're actually doing something. So taking action, supporting people in the workplace who maybe are struggling with names and pronouns. Find time to educate yourself. There's so many great resources, books and videos and things about what it means to be LGBTQ. Participate in Pride events, show your solidarity, volunteering with organizations, and recognize if you are not part of the community and you show up to a specific LGBTQ event, that you don't take up too much space. And then when you hear or witness someone saying something that is anti-LGBTQ, are you able to say what you're saying is not welcome? I love and care for LGBTQ people, and what you're saying is hurtful. That takes a lot more strength, but the more that people do this, the easier that becomes in terms of being an ally. And we certainly need allies today. You heard in the video about resource groups. Again, there are many companies that have resource groups for their communities of color or people with disabilities or LGBTQ people. These tend to be larger companies, but they also create a safe place for folks who are in community to share what's going on in the workplace, to find a sense of camaraderie in the workplace. So consider having one of those resource groups in your workplace. Action steps moving forward. How does this work get done? Well, watching this video and hearing me is one thing. Actually putting this into action is something completely different. And so you do actually have to think about, how are we going to do this in the workplace? So, and who's going to do it? You know, who's responsible for making sure that your workplace is inclusive? Is it one person? Is it a team? Is it a work group? And setting some milestones, you know, by this summer, by the hiring season this summer, you want a new plan in place to make sure that potential new hires know that we're a welcoming, inclusive employer. So maybe by May of this year, you're going to have something in writing on your website. I don't know. It's really important for you to not just like hear these conversations, but to take action steps and put those planning into action. Who else need you pull into this conversation? Other managers, other coworkers, to get feedback. If you have LGBTQ people that you know are part of this conversation in the workplace, run by some ideas by them. We're thinking of doing this. What do you think? I'm sure there are other questions about action steps and planning, but this work does not get done unless you sit down and think about what the process looks like for you. Because if you just come here and you walk away, oh yeah, we're done, that's not it. That doesn't make your workplace more inclusive and welcoming. So I think we're almost at the end. I'm just going to go click one more slide just to be sure. Then I'm going to go back and scroll up and find some of these questions that I was unable to answer. Oh, resources. There are so many resources here in the state of Maine and nationally that can help you become a more inclusive employer and welcoming employer. Of course, use us, EqualityMaine, as a resource. There are other organizations listed here. Our closest partner is Maine Transnet, which is our statewide trans organization. PFLAG is a really great organization that is support for parents and families who have LGBTQ family members. There are time and time, there's just so many here. It's just a nice thing to see that Maine has such a wonderful array of local resources on LGBTQ people and their rights, whether that's medical, whether that's legal, whether it's about just being a Mainer. And there's some really great national organizations too that are really important. On the bottom of the national list is actually one of my favorite workplace organizations that is dedicated to LGBT inclusion globally, and that is I.D.E.A.S. They have some of the best workplace resources that I've ever found. And so I.D.E.A.S is a really great resource for folks who want to learn more about being an inclusive employer here in Maine or across the globe. So that's my recommendation. Lots of great resources for you to sort of pick through. And we're sort of wrapping up at 10, 18, 19. So I'm going to kind of scroll back to see if I've missed some questions here. And if you have questions, please go over to the comment area and put them in there, because I'm going to scroll backwards. Boop, 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 boop. Hi, Rachel. You're popping in.
Hi, I'm just here to support you going through the questions. Don't mind me.
Yep. What are some common mistakes, microaggressions that happen in the workplace that we may not have our antenna attuned to? That's a mouthful, but thank you for that question, Liz. This is a great question. So for those folks who don't, I think everybody knows by now what a mistake or a microaggression may look like. And a lot of this is unintended. And I think it's important to recognize this. Probably the most common one is being misgendered or using the wrong pronouns. That's probably the most common one. And what I would usually say here is, this is the first time I've made this mistake. Why is that person so upset with me? I apologized, but they seem so upset now. And I think this is so important to recognize what microaggressions can feel like at the other end. And so for me, I think that story when I said I'm calling somebody about an order and someone says, "Sir, I'm sorry, your order isn't in." And I'm like, I have to correct them and go, well, maybe it's ma'am, and maybe next week. And maybe this is the first time this person made that mistake today, this week. But for me, this may be the 3rd, 5th, 10th, 20th time this week that I've been misgendered, whether it's getting coffee this morning, whether it was picking up my dry cleaning, whether it was picking my kid at school, that I've been called something that isn't me, whether it was the wrong pronoun, the wrong name. And so maybe you made that one little mistake, but then you get we've all been there. I've been there. I've made the mistake, and someone and I'm like, oops. Just know that accumulation over time can be really it's like getting bit by a mosquito. Most of us can handle getting stung by a mosquito once, even twice. But after 10, 20 mosquito bites, you're going to be a little raw, right? And that's what happens with a microaggression. You may have done it once, but that person may be experiencing time and time again throughout the day, And so if you make a mistake, just be aware that apologize, move on, do a better job next time. And if that person becomes really inflamed, just recognize oh, has this been happening repeatedly? Is it here? Maybe we can do it. If it's in the workplace, maybe oh, I didn't even realize this was something happening at work. Maybe that's a strategy we can work on to make sure that we can do what we can here. Or if it's at I usually go get coffee over there, but they've misgendered me 2 times. Well, let's go together. Is it okay if I go with you? Maybe in solidarity, we can go get coffee together and make sure that they use the right name and pronouns. And so be aware on your mistakes, but also understanding that how that impact may feel for them, may be very different. That's a really great question, Liz, about microaggressions. Liz, do you see some other questions? I'm just trying to scroll. There's some here.
As far as resources that you've referenced throughout your presentation, I saw a couple questions regarding some of the items. For example, at 9:30, Lynn Tillotson commented, "Where can we find that map?" I believe it was referring back to your second or third slide.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's the Movement Advancement Project. If you just want to type that into the Googles, it'll bring you right to their website. And they have the most up-to-date maps based on different categories: employment, healthcare, all sorts of things. And they have great messaging guides on how to talk about employees in the workplace, and you may get questions like restrooms, transgender people going to the bathroom. We go to the bathroom just like anybody else, you know? And so there's actually a whole section on how do you talk to people who may be uncomfortable sharing a restroom with a transgender person. You know, go to the restroom, wash your hands just like anybody else. But maybe you need some talking points to have that conversation who may be like, hey, I just saw a guy in the restroom, or I think it was a guy. I don't know. How do you handle that as a manager, as a supervisor? How do you respond in a way that isn't going to be alarmist, isn't going to make the situation worse, isn't going to embarrass somebody? So Movement Advancement Project definitely has some communication and guidelines on how you talk about this, but also answer people's questions in a way that is helpful and not incendiary as well. Great question. Thank you.
And then a second item, something you touched on regarding resources was the inclusion conference that you referenced for next week. If you're comfortable with it, the PRC is happy to include a link to that in our follow-up email.
Great. Yeah, that's this is his third or fourth year that a group of people have put together about workplace inclusion, all sorts of diversity related to the workplace. I know I'll be part of a panel one of those days. It's hundreds, if not thousands, of people will be gathering next week. I believe it's at Holiday Inn this year. So if someone could put that link in there, that would be really great.
Great.
Any more?
There is so much in here. Let me see. Let's see. Maybe you touched upon this. I believe you did, but Katie commented at 9:25 this morning. How can we politely educate our colleagues and encourage them to be respectful in our current climate? So that's kind of like an overview question. If you wouldn't mind readdressing it.
Yeah, I get it. This is not like an easy time to sort of navigate workplace situations, a political climate, what's happening in Washington. I get it. And naming that, I think, is really important. And saying, yeah, I know there are a lot of feelings related to what's going on politically here in Maine and across the country. And what we're doing here, and I always bring it like whoop, right back here. What we're doing here at so-and-so business is we believe in diversity. We believe in LGBTQ people. You know, that is part of our values, that the fabric of Maine is diverse. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have people immigrants from all over the globe choosing to live in Maine. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the participation of LGBTQ plus people. We celebrate diversity. We think it makes our workplace better. And I know there's a lot of stuff out there related to the politics of this, but this is who we are. And I think that's a good opportunity as an employer just to revisit what your values are. So when you're getting some of that, maybe that heat or pushback about the current climate, to say, hey, this is who we are as an employer. This is what we believe in. There are LGBTQ people who we care about, that we love, who shop here, who are part of our employees, or they're connected to who we are. And I think sort of bring it back home, I think, is really important. Let that other stuff happen and maybe not get involved with that part of it, but recognize that you do play a role as an employer to make sure that people who are here in Maine can get a job, can go to your store, go to your bank, and feel like they are welcome and included in this conversation. I think you can always kind of bring it back to shared values of what you stand for as a company.
Great. And I think we might have time for one more question here. I know we started a bit late, so I won't be a stickler with the timing this morning. Let's see. You touched upon this as well, but just to reiterate it, Lynn commented at 9:27 this morning. What are the most accepted, quote, accepted letters? I hear you say LGBTQ. I see this on the slide, LGBTQT plus, and then there is LGBTQIA.
Yeah, that's a great question, Lynn. And like I said, it's constantly changing, and it depends on who you're working with or what location you're in. There's no governing body that says these are the letters that everyone uses. And EqualityMaine has shifted slowly from LGBT to LGBTQ to LGBTQ plus. And then, of course, there are other letters, but it gets really long. So sometimes we don't use them all. I know some folks use just Q or Q plus or Q squared. If you make an attempt, great. And people stumble. I've definitely heard people stumble around like saying them because it's kind of a mouthful to say LGBTQ. We kind of joke around and we say it's LGBTQ. Doesn't make any sense, but it kind of has a nice little ring to it, en français. If you're making a earnest attempt, we appreciate that. So again, it's constantly changing.
Great. Thank you so much, Gia. Truly. Thank you for your patience with the PRC team this morning, as well as, of course, your time and your expertise during the training. You answered everyone's questions so carefully, and especially you've provided us with some important action items and resources to utilize moving forward. So thank you so much for that. And thank you. I would be remiss if I did not thank my chamber staff member, my fellow chamber staff member, Riley Legier, for helping to produce this morning's event. Technology is only great if it works, and Riley certainly made it work this morning. Another shout out to both Springborn staffing and Visit Portland for their generous support of this series throughout the season. The chamber and our community couldn't have these conversations without that support, so thank you. And of course, thank you for everyone attending this morning and sticking around during our technical difficulties. We hope you return and attend throughout the season. If you're interested in learning more about today's topic, and of course, continuing the conversation with Gia and EqualityMaine, be sure to check your email for a follow-up message with the appropriate contact information, which you just saw up on that previous slide of Gia's. And we'll also include links to additional resources referenced during today's presentation. We look forward to seeing you again on Tuesday, March 4th from 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. for our next episode of I.D.E.A.S, where we'll hear from Noel Bonham, who is the State Director of AARP Maine. He'll speak on ageism in the workplace, how to engage older workers as workplace assets. Noel will provide us with an interactive session on current and emerging workforce trends on a variety of topics relating to workers 50 and over. Come learn more about what older workers seek through employment opportunities and how to engage older adults in a more meaningful and effective way at the workplace. All right, everyone, thank you again for attending this morning. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you again next month here on another episode of I.D.E.A.S.